The 5th of July 1919 was a fine day in Staunton, Leicestershire, and its being her day off work, Bella Wright decided to pay a visit to her cousin Agnes, who had recently had a baby. She spent the afternoon writing letters, and at about 6 p.m. she got her bicycle out and rode out to Galby, where her cousin lived, some 4 miles from her home. She stopped to speak to the postmistress on her way and gave her the letter she intended to post. On her way to Galby, she had problems with her rear wheel and stopped to examine it. At this point, it seems a man appeared on a distinctive green bicycle, who stopped to inquire whether he could be of assistance. She asked if he had a spanner, as her rear wheel appeared to be loose. He didn't, but offered to ride with her to her destination to ensure she got there without further problems. The two rode off together and were seen chatting as they did so by numerous witnesses. When they arrived at the house of Bella's uncle, George Measures, where her cousin Agnes and her husband were staying, George noticed the man waiting for her and asked who he was. Bella said she didn't know, but that he had stopped when she had had problems with her wheel and had stayed with her since. She gave the impression she thought him slightly odd, but harmless, and said she thought he would be gone by the time she left. George Measures noted the man was between 30 and 40, wore a flat cap, and was riding a green BSA bicycle. The man must have got tired of hanging around, and at last Bella decided to get off home. Her cousin and uncle saw her off, and as she rode away they noticed the man on the green bicycle ride up and join her, saying, "Bella, you have been a long time. I thought you'd gone the other way." It was 8:50 in the evening. The sun was declining, and it was the last time they would see Bella alive. Approximately 30 minutes after leaving George's house, at 9:20 p.m., a local farmer, Joseph Cowell, was herding his cows along the road between pastures and saw a lump in the Gartree Road at Little Stretton. By now the sun was setting, and it wasn't until he was close to the lump that he realized it was a figure lying on the road beside a bicycle. Suspecting an accident had occurred, he ran up to the body and found it to be that of a young woman, and that she was dead. He put his cows in the field and then hurried off home to inform the local police constable at Great Glen, who phoned a Dr. Edward Williams, and together they made their way to the place where the young woman had been found. It was 10:30 p.m. by the time Constable Alfred Hall arrived. Joseph Cowell awaited him, together with 2 other men, and he made a brief inspection of the scene. Bella was still wearing her hat and coat, and it appeared that a tragic accident of some kind had occurred. Together they lifted Bella's body onto Cowell's cart, and Dr. Williams examined her. He gave his opinion that she had had a hemorrhage or seizure and had fallen from her bicycle. They took the body to a nearby disused chapel, where Dr. Williams made a further examination by candlelight, and noted bruising to her face. He advised P.C. Hall to write hemorrhage as the likely cause of death in his report. It seems Hall had a restless night, because he rose at 6 a.m. and rode out on his bicycle to the place where Bella had fallen, and searched for any indications as to what might have occurred. He saw that a crow had been feeding on the blood, because there were the footprints of a large bird to be seen leading from the scene to a wooden gate, which had a smear of blood on its top. He found little else of note, and cycled back home in the afternoon. But he was still dissatisfied, and he returned in the early evening, and this time, a little way from the body, he found a bullet buried in a cow's hoof-print. Having recently returned to his post as a policeman from the trenches in France, Hall recognized it as being a .45 caliber bullet, fired by a weapon he was familiar with, a Webley Scott service revolver, which was standard army issue for officers. Hall spoke to Dr. Williams and returned to the scene again that evening, in company with Joseph Cowell, the farmer. They followed a track from the field where Bella had died, and found a dead crow. Dr. Williams and P.C. Hall visited the chapel and cleaned Bella's face. They found a bullet entry hole on her left cheek that had exited behind her right ear. A post-mortem conducted by Dr. Williams and another doctor confirmed that she had been shot. The bicycle accident was now a murder inquiry. Superintendent Herbert Taylor took charge of the investigation and visited Stretton Parva, where he matched the feet of the dead crow with the bloody bird footprints found near the body. Bella's mother had reported her daughter missing on the Sunday morning, and it was quickly confirmed that Bella was the young woman who had been found at Little Stretton. Police questioned her uncle, George Measures, and her cousin, and learned of the man on the green bicycle whom other witnesses also reported seeing in Bella's company. On Monday the 7th of July, the police issued a poster seeking information and offering a £5 reward for the discovery of the man riding the distinctive green bicycle. A description of him was also given. He was between 35 and 40 years of age, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, and he was wearing a grey suit with a collar and tie and a flat cap. A bicycle shop owner, Harry Cox, came forward to report that he had repaired a green BSA bicycle for someone who fitted the police description of the man seen with Bella. The man had not given him his name, but had told the shop owner that he was from London and had recently been demobilised from the army. Scotland Yard sent Detective Chief Inspector Albert Hawkins from London to help Leicestershire Police with the inquiry, but in spite of a more dramatic poster seeking information and a £20 reward, nothing came of it. At an inquest held on several dates throughout the summer of 1919, a Dr. Evans reported that pieces of metal and debris found in Bella's head wound indicated that the gun had been fired from a distance of approximately 4 to 5 feet. He also said that there were no suggestions of sexual assault, and her purse was found on her, and nothing had been taken. The bicycle repairman, Harry Cox, made a statement concerning the man whose bicycle he had repaired. "I had half an hour's talk with him, and he said he was staying with friends in Leicestershire. He said he was a demobilised officer and working in London. He said the firm had told him he could have another 2 or 3 weeks' holiday on full pay as they were not busy." Cox also said that the man had a Cockney accent and spoke with a squeaky voice. Bella's uncle and cousins told of the man hanging around outside the cottage. The gunsmith gave evidence that it was a .455 bullet from a revolver or rifle, and certainly from an army weapon. The verdict of the inquest was one of wilful murder against a person or persons unknown. Apart from the evidence heard at the inquest, the case went cold, and by the end of the year the police had begun to wind down their inquiry, and privately held out little hope of finding the man with the green bicycle. Not a single useful piece of information had been gleaned in the past 6 months of the investigation, and it was now 8 months since the murder of Bella Wright. Then an extraordinary piece of good fortune occurred. On the 23rd of February 1920, a canal haulier, Enoch Whitehouse, was carrying coal on the River Soar when he snagged his tow rope on something on the riverbed. He pulled in the rope to extricate it from whatever had snagged it, and found it to be caught on what appeared to be a bicycle. The bicycle was green. Enoch recalled the story from the previous year which he had read of in the newspapers, and he recovered the bicycle and took it to the police. The police confirmed that it was indeed the green bicycle they had been looking for, and a BSA agent was called in to examine the bike. It seems the bicycle serial numbers had been carefully filed off, as well as the maker's name. But as the bicycle was a special order bicycle, painted in bright green and with an unusual braking system, it had been stamped with an additional serial number on the frame forks, and this was faintly visible. BSA records showed the bicycle to have been manufactured in 1910 and dispatched to a dealer in Derby called Orton Brothers. Joseph Orton went back over his records and was able to tell the police that a sum of £13 and 13 shillings had been paid for the green bicycle in May 1910 by a man named Ronald Light. The police traced Light to an address in Cheltenham, where he was working as a mathematics teacher at a private school called Dean Close. Superintendent Taylor travelled to Cheltenham on the 4th of March to interview him. At first, Light claimed he had never owned a green bicycle, then that he had, but had sold it after only a short time to someone whose name he couldn't recall. He also said he had never been to Galby and had never heard of Bella Wright. Light was well-spoken, plausible, privately educated, from a good background, and an ex-army officer. On the face of it, he seemed an unlikely suspect for the brutal murder of a young woman. However, when the bicycle repairman travelled to Cheltenham and picked Ronald Light out from a 10-man lineup, Light was arrested and charged with the murder of Bella Wright. Ronald Light was born in 1885 of wealthy parents. He was educated at prep school and Oakham Private School in Rutland, and in 1920 he was working as a mathematics teacher at a private school in Cheltenham. He was an engineer and had also served as an army officer during the First World War. And yet on closer inspection, his record didn't look quite so good as a first glance suggested. It seems he was expelled from his private school at the age of 17 for lifting a young girl's skirt above her head. He had graduated from Birmingham University and then commenced an engineering apprenticeship for the Midland Railway in Derby. Although well liked, he was dismissed for setting fire to a store and drawing obscene graffiti on the toilet walls. At this point the First World War broke out, and he was commissioned as a lieutenant in the Royal Engineers and dispatched to France in 1915. He was involved in trench construction, but after only 10 weeks he was sent home on the grounds that he lacked initiative as an officer. There were suggestions that this was a cover for a different reason for his dismissal, that of assaulting a French postmistress. Shortly after this time, in 1916, Ronald Light's father died as a result of a fall from a window, which was probably suicide. Mrs. Light said that he had been very worried about Ronald beforehand. Also around this time, Ronald was twice investigated by police for attempting to seduce a 15-year-old girl, he was in his 30s, and for improper conduct with an 8-year-old girl. Ronald worked as a labourer on a farm in 1916, where he set fire to a haystack and was dismissed, and thereafter he enlisted as a gunner in the reserves. Twice the reserves were ordered to France, and twice they received mysterious counter-orders instructing them to stand down. An investigation revealed that Light was forging the counter-orders, and he was court-martialed and sentenced to 12 months' imprisonment as a result. He was released after 4 months and sent to France in 1917. Here he suffered deafness and tinnitus as a result of artillery fire, and possibly also suffered shell shock. In any case, he was sent home after 10 months and hospitalized in military hospitals, where he received psychiatric treatment until the end of the war. After being demobilized in early 1919, he returned to live with his mother in Highfield Street, Leicester. He had moved to Cheltenham in January 1920 to take up the position as schoolmaster at Dean Close School. After his arrest, Light was removed to Leicestershire and remanded in custody while the police built their case against him. The canal was dredged and searched, a leather holster and bullets were found, and also the rear bicycle wheel, but not the Webley revolver. At committal proceedings, Ronald Light said only, "I am innocent, and by the advice of my legal advisers, I reserve my defence," and was remanded to stand trial at Leicester Castle for the murder of Bella Wright. The trial of Ronald Light began on the 8th of June 1920 before Justice Thomas Horridge. With the assistance of his mother and a family friend, he secured the services of the very best defence barrister that money could buy, Sir Edward Marshall Hall. The prosecution was led by the Attorney General, Sir Gordon Hewitt. At the trial, Mrs. Light's housemaid gave evidence that Ronald had ridden his bicycle frequently until the time of the murder, after which it had remained in the kitchen until it disappeared, and he had said he had sold it. She also testified that all his clothes from that day had either been sold or destroyed. Two girls, Muriel Nunney and Valeria Caven, aged 14 and 12, gave evidence that they were approached by Light on the day of the murder. They stated that a man on a green bicycle had approached them and had tried to persuade one of them to go for a ride with him alone, but they had refused and ridden away. They had subsequently picked Light out from a police lineup. The testimony of Bella's uncle, George Measures, and her cousin Agnes and her husband, James Evans, was heard relating to Bella and the strange man on the bicycle. Firearms and forensic testimony was heard concerning the holster and bullets, and the injuries caused by the bullet wound. The defence argued that the two girls had been led by the police, that their statements had been given after Light was taken into custody, and the case was already prominent in the newspapers. Marshall Hall said that Light had lied initially to protect his mother, who suffered from heart problems, that he had undoubtedly been wrong not to have come forward to eliminate himself from inquiries, but that he was suffering from nerve damage as a result of shell shock incurred in France. He also said that Light had reasoned that as he could give the police no information in the matter, he had not thought he could assist them in any way. In addition, it was submitted to the court that although Light had owned a Webley revolver, he had left this in France in 1918 at a casualty clearing station and did not know what had become of it. Above all, Marshall Hall said that Ronald Light had no motive for killing Bella Wright. He did not know her. There was no quarrel, and she had not been sexually assaulted or robbed. Marshall Hall advanced the theory that she had been shot by someone out shooting with a rifle in the fields, possibly crows, and that it was a tragic accident. Ronald Light was placed in the dock and subjected to 5 hours of cross-examination, but he never faltered or contradicted himself. He said that he had encountered Bella leaning over her bicycle while riding on the evening of the 5th of July, and had inquired if he might help. She had asked him for a spanner, and he did not have one, but the two rode on together to her uncle's cottage, where he was given to understand that she wished him to wait for her. He had in fact left, but got a puncture, which he mended, and as he commenced his journey, he saw her emerge from the house, and he had joined her. He said they had parted soon after leaving her uncle's house, when she had stopped and indicated she was going another direction. They had said goodbye, and that was the last he had seen of her, and the extent of his involvement with her. In fact, he said he had not even known her name until he had seen it in the newspaper on the 8th of July, contradicting the testimony of George Measures. He told the court, "I knew from newspaper reports the next day that she was the girl I had been with just before she died. I knew the police wanted to question me. I got rid of everything that could have connected me with her. I was afraid. I see now, of course, that I did the wrong thing." After the judge had summed up, the jury retired for 3 hours and then returned with a verdict of not guilty. Ronald Light was freed, and the press and public were satisfied with the outcome, because they were well disposed towards him. He had proved an excellent witness in the dock, had given a good account of himself, his conduct was flawless, and his explanation was plausible. But no one else was ever arrested or tried for the murder of Bella Wright, and the question that has been asked ever since is, was Ronald Light guilty of her murder? Ronald Light was helped greatly in his defence by 4 things. Firstly, He had a good background as a public school boy. He was well educated, worked at a private school, had a university degree, and had been an officer, albeit for a short time, during the war. Secondly, he was well-spoken, gave excellent accounts in court, which appeared frank and believable, and which seemed to have been accepted by those present. Thirdly, none of the adverse history of sexual impropriety and misdemeanour came out in court or in the press at the time, although the police and prosecution certainly had possession of these details. It enabled the defence to present Light as an officer and a gentleman, which was really only, at best, a half-truth. Fourthly, and finally, he had the best defence barrister in England at this time, Sir Edward Marshall Hall, whose record in successfully defending accused murderers and of diminishing the impact of the most damning evidence was second to none. But taking all in all on the accumulation of evidence against Light, including that not presented at trial, the argument for his guilt is persuasive. Ronald Light had a long history of sexual impropriety and minor misdemeanour, which had led to his expulsion and dismissal from numerous institutions and jobs over the years. This mark ran indelibly through his life, and had even resulted in him spending a brief spell in prison. Bella's uncle, George Measures, and his cousins testified that Bella had felt uneasy about Light, and they on her behalf, and that she hoped to evade him by lingering at the cottage. The reappearance of Ronald Light as they rode off suggested, in spite of his claims that she wished him to wait for her, and that he had a puncture which had required repair, that he had attached himself to her in that persistent and unwanted way which characterized his behaviour, and appeared to unsettle people, especially women. No one else was seen with Bella or in the vicinity by any witnesses. Ronald Light was the sole stranger and suspicious person seen in the area. Although the weapon was never found, the fact of Light's ownership of a Webley revolver, which was surely the murder weapon, and his discarding a holster and .455 caliber bullets for one, is highly suggestive. So much of Ronald Light's psychological profile fitted that of the killer. His strange and aggressive solitary pursuit of vulnerable women, together with an antisocial predilection for reacting badly when things didn't go his way or circumstances didn't suit him, fit him well for the role of the murderer. If Bella had tried to evade him further when they continued their journey, and her unease had increased, it seems likely he would have reacted badly. The fact that he tried to persuade one of the two girls to ride alone with him suggests he was on the prowl. Having been thwarted once by them, would only have raised his ire and increased his determination with Bella. The events of that day, in fact, present us with a narrative that leads irrevocably to Ronald Light. Bella's attempts to evade him by remaining at her uncle's house did not deter him, and he caught her up with a thinly disguised, irritable, "I thought you'd gone the other way." It's safe to assume that Bella's unease would have been significantly increased by his sudden reappearance when she believed she had shaken him off. She had tried to escape him, because the route she took home was a longer one, and her sole motive for taking a longer route, with the sun going down, must have been to part company with and discourage Light. What occurred between them as they rode on can only be guessed at, but it seems fair to assume that the companionship deteriorated, that Bella said goodbye and tried to take a different route across a narrow track, but that Light guessed her intention and headed her off, now with a furious determination about him, an internal rage at the affront of her rejection. How better to counteract this than by forestalling her and waiting at the gate where he guessed she would emerge? When Bella appeared at the entrance to the gate at Stretton Parva, it would have been a shock to her to find Ronald Light awaiting her again, and something of a triumph for him. But her reaction, which can only have been fear or even an expression of fright, would only intensify Light's fraught psychological state. He had triumphed over her attempts to evade him, but the psychological game would be out of his control. He may have produced a revolver to frighten her, or there may have been an exchange between the two, but the dynamics would have rapidly been escalating beyond anyone's control. He had power over her at this moment, but this power was temporary and would result in his defeat if he withdrew. She may have tried to turn away, wheeling her bicycle with the intention of withdrawing, and this would have been her last move. Ronald Light shot her as she turned, or at least at the critical point in the transaction between them. Her rejection, perceived as an act of contempt, was met by its perfect riposte. He killed her. There is a fascinating postscript to this case. For years after Ronald Light's acquittal, there were stories of a confession made by Light being kept in a safe in Leicester police station. But such stories are a commonplace of murder cases, and these were given little credence. Then, after the Leicestershire police records were rehoused in the Leicestershire Council archives in the late 1990s, a memo was discovered which had been typewritten and signed by Superintendent Levi Bowley. It stated that Ronald Light had returned to the police station 3 days after his trial to collect some personal possessions. He had met with Superintendent Bowley, and as the two had got on well while Light was on remand, he had said to Bowley, "Well, you're a good sport. If I tell you something, can I depend on you keeping it to yourself?" Bowley had, of course, agreed. "Well, I'll tell you. But mind, it must be strictly confidential. No other person knows about it, and if you divulge it, I shall, of course, say I never told you anything of the kind." Then, apparently, Ronald Light said, "I did shoot the girl, but it was completely accidental. We were riding quietly along. I had my revolver in my raincoat pocket, and we dismounted for her to look at it. I had fired off some shots in the afternoon for practice, and had no idea there was a loaded cartridge in it. Her hand was out to take it when it went off. She fell and never stirred. I was frightened and altogether unnerved, and I got on my bicycle and rode away." Since the discovery of this memo in 2007, its authenticity has been questioned. Examinations of the document show that it was typed on pre-1950s notepaper, and that the signature of Superintendent Bowley appears to be genuine. A further exchange, which gives the appearance of corroborating the authenticity of the memo, was found in letters between the Chief Constable of Leicestershire Police and the Attorney General Hewitt concerning the possibility of bringing perjury charges against Ronald Light after the trial and his acquittal. Although it doesn't directly refer to the grounds on which such charges could be made, it is believed that it does indeed refer to the memo written by Bowley, because under the rule of double jeopardy, in force at that time, Light could not be tried for the same crime twice. He would, however, be capable of being prosecuted for perjury, given that his account, given under oath, would, by virtue of his apparent confession, be false. The Attorney General made clear in the subsequent exchange with the Chief Constable that further evidence would be necessary before the Crown could contemplate such a step. Nothing further was discovered, however, and as far as we know, that was an end of the matter. It would indeed have been a bold step for Light to confess to a police superintendent that he had shot Bella. Any policeman would feel duty-bound to report such a conversation. But Ronald Light was an odd and bold character, as the many incidents in his life attest. Light was, of course, buoyant and brimming with confidence from his recent acquittal, as the account suggests, which lends this incident a certain credibility. In any case, this came to nothing, and his confession, whether it was made or not, does not alter the weight of probability, based on the facts themselves, that beyond a reasonable doubt, Ronald Light killed Bella Wright on the 5th of July, 1919, at Stretton Parva. After the trial, Ronald Light maintained a low profile. He changed his name for a while to Leonard Estelle, and thereafter moved to Lansdowne-on-Sea in Kent. He married Lillian Lester, an older woman and a war widow, in 1934. And little was known of him afterwards, except that his neighbours remembered him as an old man who liked to lean on his gate watching the world beyond, perhaps recalling a certain day in July, 50 years earlier. Ronald Light died on the 15th of May, 1975, at the age of 89.